Welcome back to Respoiled. Today, I have another captivating story to share with you. But before we dive in, if you're new here, I invite you to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications, so you'll never miss out on all of my latest uploads. Now let's get started. In the future, a satellite capsule named Pilgrim is returning from Mars carrying soil samples anticipated to confirm the existence of extraterrestrial life. Unfortunately, Pilgrim sustains damage from asteroids, knocking it off its intended path. Now, the crew aboard the International Space Station must intercept Pilgrim and recover the samples. After assisting Rory in preparing for a spacewalk, the remaining crew swiftly takes their positions to aid Rory in navigating during the rescue mission. Rory ventures outside to reach the station's mechanical arm and directs it to capture Pilgrim, which unexpectedly approaches at high speed, causing the entire station to tremble upon contact. For a moment, the crew fears a mishap, but Rory reassures them that he has successfully captured the Pilgrim. Afterwards, Hugh, the paralytic astrobiologist, meticulously begins testing the sample and is delighted to find an almost fossilized single-cell organism in the soil. Attempting to revive the organism yields no response, prompting Hugh to replicate the atmosphere of early Earth's Proterozoic era by introducing a growth hormone. This time, the organism responds, initiating movement, prompting the crew to celebrate their groundbreaking discovery of life beyond Earth. News outlets on Earth swiftly broadcast this remarkable discovery, prompting the crew to showcase their work on TV, explaining station operations, including astronaut bathroom routines, for educational purposes. A selected school has the privilege of naming the organism, and the children opt for Calvin, sparking jubilation among large crowds. Later, Dr. Miranda assesses David's well-being, expressing apprehension as his 473-day stint aboard the station approaches a new record. David's physical decline is rapid, nearing his radiation threshold, yet he remains indifferent. Having served in the military and experienced war, David favors the station's environment, free from human hostility. The following day, Hugh observes Calvin's rapid growth, now comprising numerous cells forming a neural network. These cells exhibit multifunctionality, acting as muscles, nerves, and photoreceptors simultaneously. Commander Cat characterizes Calvin as possessing complete brain, muscle, and visual capabilities. Hugh observes Calvin developing appendages and attempts to establish contact, prompting the cells to move and form intriguing shapes. Meanwhile, during dinner, Engineer Show witnesses a live broadcast of his wife delivering their baby daughter. The crew celebrates with him, and Kat presents him with a book for virtual storytime sessions. Later, David utilizes specialized software to monitor his health while Hugh re-examines Calvin. Despite its diminutive size, Calvin now possesses a complete body and clings to Hugh's finger. Several weeks pass before the crew is startled by an alarm emanating from the laboratory. Rory swiftly resolves the malfunction, leaving Miranda puzzled about its cause. Hugh considers the possibility of overlooking something, prompting Rory and Miranda to reprimand him for carelessness due to the unknown nature of their situation. Several days later, Calvin becomes entirely inactive, potentially entering hibernation due to the air pressure alteration caused by the malfunction. Miranda feels relieved as Calvin's rapid growth had been a concern for her. While Calvin remains inactive, the crew takes the opportunity to enhance lab security, ensuring constant sealing. During Miranda's examination of Hugh's legs, he admits feeling guilty about potentially causing Calvin's condition with his mistake. After discussing options, Hugh opts to stimulate Calvin with minimal electrical voltage to provoke a response. Initial attempts yield no results, but Calvin abruptly awakens, seizing Hugh's hand and breaking the electric wand. Despite Hugh's efforts to retrieve his hand, Calvin's surprising strength and leverage from its lower body clinging to the box thwart his attempts. Reoffering the wand doesn't divert its attention, and Calvin begins squeezing so forcefully that Hugh's hand contorts unnervingly. Despite the crew's desire to intervene, Miranda forbids them, fearing for their safety. Suddenly, Hugh's head collides with the box, rendering him unconscious as Calvin finally releases its grip, revealing the extent of the damage to his hand. Calvin tests the glove and realizes it cannot break it, so it seizes the electric wand and uses it to puncture the glove, freeing itself. Immediately, it targets the lab rat, viciously attacking and devouring it within seconds. While Calvin is preoccupied with its meal, Rory seizes the opportunity to enter the lab and rescue Hugh, passing his body to his crewmates. However, Calvin quickly leaps onto Rory's leg, prompting the crew to seal the lab again with him inside. Rory then grabs an oxygen candle and attempts to burn Calvin, who promptly evades and seeks cover. Cat authorizes Rory to eliminate the creature, so he takes the incinerator and pursues the alien throughout the lab. Despite Rory's repeated attempts to engulf it in flames, Calvin remains elusive and resilient. Eventually, Rory exhausts the fuel and opens the container where Calvin was last seen, only to discover it empty. Suddenly, Calvin springs onto Rory's face and enters his mouth, leaving the crew to witness in horror as Rory is slowly consumed from within until he becomes a lifeless body with blood surrounding him. Adding to the trouble, the floating incinerator sets off the fire alarm, prompting the release of suppressant gas into the lab. Seizing the opportunity, Calvin emerges from Rory's body, now 10 times larger. Despite the crew's efforts to shut the gas valves, Calvin swiftly squeezes through a gap and flees the lab. Afterwards, the team attends to Rory's remains, and Kat sends a distress signal to NASA. However, Sho realizes that communications are malfunctioning. It appears the transmitter is faulty, necessitating an exterior repair to restore contact with Earth. Kat promptly suits up for a spacewalk and reaches the transmitter, only to find it overheated. Upon opening the coolant chamber, she discovers it's empty, implying Calvin consumed it. Suddenly, the alien emerges from the coolant chamber and latches onto Kat, seeking entry into her suit. Despite Calvin's increased size, the suit remains resilient, preventing it from breaching. Kat shuts the coolant valve and hastens back to the airlock. However, she realizes her coolant tube is damaged, causing liquid to impair her visibility. With no alternative, she leaps to expedite her return to the airlock. It's a daring maneuver as she unclips, colliding with the station and tumbling before reaching the airlock. David promptly dons his suit and hurries to assist, but Kat's helmet is flooding, and she's rapidly suffocating. Determined to take Calvin down, she clutches the airlock lever, preventing David from opening it. Tragically, Kat succumbs to drowning within moments, her lifeless body drifting away before the crew's eyes. However, Calvin catches on, leaping onto the station before the body drifts too far. The crew mourns their commander until Hugh urges action to keep Calvin out of the ship, as it remains alive and unaffected by the vacuum. With the thrusters as the sole entry point, they monitor temperature sensors to track Calvin's movements. When the alien approaches a thruster, Sho activates it to repel Calvin, but the continuous blasts unsettle the station, knocking it off course. Sho is forced to use the remaining fuel to restore the station's orbit, allowing Calvin to re-enter. Hugh theorizes that Calvin's species once dominated Mars but went into hibernation when the planet's atmosphere collapsed. He suggests replicating that same atmospheric absence to compel Calvin into dormancy. The crew concurs, retreating to a capsule and sealing themselves off before purging the oxygen from the rest of the station. While fortifying additional layers of sealing, Hugh is startled by a shadowy presence and begins to feel unwell. Miranda attempts to check on him, but he insists he's all right. Over the following hours, the crew can only wait, mourning their lost comrades while Hugh shoulders the blame, though David reminds him it was a collective decision to confront Calvin. Hugh further observes that Calvin is merely a creature striving to survive, necessitating sustenance. As Hugh loses consciousness, the computers signal a decline in his vitals, prompting the others to hasten stabilization efforts. While administering defibrillation, they notice movement on Hugh's leg. Unzipping the suit, they recoil in shock to find Calvin feeding on him. Hugh's condition had rendered him unaware of the intrusion. Miranda attempts to shock Calvin with the defibrillator, inadvertently causing the alien to levitate, revealing its evolved state. The crew hastily exits, inadvertently splitting up. Sho seeks refuge inside a sleeping pod to evade Calvin's pursuit. Calvin seizes the pod tightly, attempting to breach it, before eventually losing interest and departing. As David and Miranda return to Hugh, who is nearing the end, he requests his friends to raise him so he can experience weightlessness one last time before passing away. While the pair mourns, they notice a flashing light on the screen, indicating that Calvin inadvertently ingested Hugh's tracker, enabling them to track its movements and devise a strategy. Calvin roams throughout the station and eventually returns to Hugh's location. However, as it consumes the body, it senses the trap, prompting David and Miranda to seal the door, trapping it inside. They then evacuate the oxygen from the room to suffocate it, a process that may take some time. Just then, the computer announces the approach of a shuttle, and David realizes that Kat's distress call did reach Earth. The shuttle doesn't establish communication. Instead, it begins striking the station. Miranda discloses that this is the final emergency protocol. The shuttle's purpose isn't rescue but to propel them into deep space, preventing Calvin from reaching Earth. In the sleeping chamber, Sho hears the announcement and assumes rescue, exiting the pod and leaving the hatch ajar as he heads to the docking area for the shuttle. Miranda and David hurry to caution him, but Calvin ambushes Sho as he opens the hatch. As the shuttle departs, the open hatch initiates decompression, pulling Sho outward while Calvin ascends his leg. Miranda attempts to retrieve Sho, but Calvin advances toward him, causing Sho to release Miranda to repel Calvin. Subsequently, Sho is ejected into space, yet Calvin remains attached to the station. It endeavors to seize Miranda, but she repels it with a tool, reuniting with David to re-enter the station and seal the door. Observing through the window, they witness the station's disintegration, with fragments colliding, exacerbating the devastation. David examines the computer and finds that life support, temperature, and oxygen are declining rapidly. He observes that the station's turmoil has propelled it towards Earth, giving them only around 30 minutes before re-entry. Regrettably, surviving the re-entry is impossible, and accessing the escape pods would expose them to Calvin's attacks. Resigned to their fate and coping with the chilling conditions, they stumble upon the book intended for Sho's daughter, prompting David to suggest reading it. David, contemplating his situation, conceives a plan. Since Calvin is drawn to oxygen, they could entice it into an escape pod using oxygen candles. Proposing to launch himself with Calvin into deep space, David offers Miranda the opportunity to reach another pod and safely return to Earth. Although Miranda is reluctant about the sacrificial aspect, David asserts his piloting expertise and preference for space over Earth. Once they both don their suits, David ventures into the corridors, strategically dropping oxygen candles to guide Calvin towards the escape pod. Calvin promptly appears, leaping from candle to candle in pursuit of David, who swiftly reaches the pod. Upon entering, Calvin embraces David tightly, prompting him to divert the creature's attention with another candle before sealing the pod hatch. Miranda, observing the situation, promptly dashes out to reach the other pod. Subsequently, the capsules detach from the station and veer away, yet debris impacts both, initiating malfunctions. While Miranda wrestles with her controls, David endeavors to stabilize his pod's trajectory, but Calvin seizes both his hands, eliciting screams of pain. Following a turbulent flight, one pod hurtles into deep space while the other lands in the midst of the ocean. Fishing boats swiftly encircle it for assistance, yet upon opening, it becomes evident that David has safely reached Earth while Miranda remains adrift in space, leaving Calvin with an entire planet to menace. Don't forget to like, subscribe and enable notifications for more content like this. Thank you for watching.